And a very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest is a lady who has been an educator for more than 40 years and a member of the trade union movement for just as long. President of the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Miss Mary Ann Redman. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us on your program.
Thank you, and good evening to viewers.
Now, I want to start with looking holistically at the BSTU. You were formed back in 1946. What was the overall mandate of the union?
Well, actually, the union was formed before 1946, but was registered in 1946. Our mandate as a teacher trade union, and may say that our membership is not limited to teachers only, to educators, or to secondary school teachers, as the name might suggest. We have membership in both primary and secondary schools, and our membership includes support staff at the schools, including the secretaries, the ground staff, the lab technicians, librarians. So anyone working in an educational institution can be a member of the BSTU. We as a union are here to, as our motto says, provide security, representation, professionalism, and service to persons working in school environments. So we are concerned with protecting the interests of our membership on every level and ensuring that they work in an environment that is conducive to the work that they are hired to do. They do so in a safe and secure environment. Sorry, and we seek constantly to improve the environment in which those persons work.
How many members do you have?
We have over 700 members, about 730, the last count.
No, I have to ask you this very early.
Okay.
How do you respond to criticism that Mary Ann Redman and the union that she leads is known to cause a lot of strife? You have the entire summer vacation, for instance, to meet with teachers, thrash out certain issues, but you will wait until the first day of the new school year and disrupt classes.
I think that strife, one has to look at a definition of strife. Many unions and the work that union leaders engage in can sometimes cause a level of discomfort to others. The unions, however, do not set out to cause strife. Often, we are attempting to prevent strife as it relates to our workers. And therefore, well, that really is part of the mandate of the union. And in doing what we have to do to represent our workers' interests, it, as I said, sometimes might cause discomfort, it might cause inconvenience, but strife, our union, no way.
So you had 9 weeks holiday. Why do it at the very first day?
That is rare. That is very rare. And in an instance like that, it might be because something has arisen during the 9 weeks. For example, environmental matters in the school that have not been addressed over the summer holiday. And persons then being expected to go back into a work environment that is not conducive to their health and well-being. If then it requires that the start of school at that particular school has to be delayed, then that may happen. But it is not that we are seeking to cause disruption by not having school start at that particular institution on a particular day that represents the start of the new school year or the new school term.
You just mentioned environmental issues. I want to stick on that point. Are environmental challenges still one of your major concerns?
It is a big concern because throughout the island, we have many schools, many institutions that operate in old plants, old buildings, many of which have not been properly maintained over time. We have situations with mold, we have situations sometimes with with pests, with rodents. And these directly affect the physical health and stress levels of our members. The Shaw Act guarantees, or rather places the responsibility on the employer to provide a safe working environment for employees. And therefore, our members have a right to work in safe environments, in healthy environments. And to the extent that we have to ensure this, we take the actions that we need to take. As I said, the whole problem really revolves largely around maintenance, and there has been for a long time a lack of proper maintenance in the schools. And to be honest, there has been in more recent years an attempt to address these problems in a way that was not evident before. And so we are working with the Ministry of Education to try to reduce the incidences of disruption caused by unhealthy work environments.
Another issue of great concern to the union, of course, has been violence within schools.
Yes. Yes. And it is a situation that is very difficult to address because the approaches to address that problem have to be multifaceted, multi-pronged. There's no one answer, there's no one solution. And it is a situation where that is causing increasingly grave concern among the teaching fraternity. Teachers feel threatened, students feel threatened, and we have to. Some people may say that the horse has already bolted from the stable, but it is a matter that has to be addressed. When there was the unfortunate incident at Frederick Smith in 2018, the BSTU wrote a letter to the Ministry of Education in which we outlined about 33 recommendations that we figured could help towards addressing the problem. Some of them have been implemented, like safety officers, increased guidance counselors, a change in curriculum in some schools. And because we think that frustration, in the union, we do believe that student frustration contributes to that, what should I say, ill discipline, insofar as you have, in many instances, students who have scored low marks on the 11+ exam. They're placed in schools that do not have curricula that directly cater to their specific needs. They are expected, essentially, to complete a program, just like students who have gained top marks, and sit the same exit exams in the same time period to a large extent. They obviously cannot do that. They're frustrated, self-esteem issues, and they react. And so one of the issues that we highlighted that we thought needed to be addressed immediately in that letter was a serious look at the curriculum in some schools so that you address the identified needs of the students and you prepare them in a way in keeping with their intelligences. There must be a recognition of different intelligences, different capabilities, different talents, different skills. And children must have the opportunity to use what they have. You have to meet them where they are and to prepare them to be the best that they can be, both in school and on leaving school. And this brings us, well, I suppose we will deal with education reform.
Of course.
But I think this is one of the major issues as it affects violence in schools. I think too that in many ways, the disciplinary measures presently in use in schools are not working. Suspensions now mean nothing to children. A visit to the Annie Nichols Center they enjoy. There is no corporal punishment. Detentions mean nothing. And so there is a sense of impotence, I do believe, among so much of the teaching fraternity in relation to addressing disciplinary matters in school. Parents, too, in too many instances, have taken a different approach where they come to the school premises to engage rather than, in a negative way, rather than offer the type of support to the school and what the school is trying to do in relation to disciplining their children. So we have this confrontation now to too large an extent between parents and school authorities and teachers in relation to discipline. So in many instances, children feel that there are no consequences to their actions. And it is a very serious thing. It is a very, very serious thing.
You said there's no corporal punishment, but from what I can remember,
It
only
is there
senior
in-
teachers and principals can lash.
Yes, and that provision still exists in the Education Act, but in reality, it is hardly ever used. And it is hardly ever used because even though it is there in the statute books, the principals and the senior teachers who can legally engage in corporal punishment feel as if there is no support for them in using that type of disciplinary measure. So that if a parent objects or if the parent gets a lawyer to write a letter, then the person who has delivered the corporal punishment feels that there will be no support for them, either from administration or the Ministry of Education, even though it remains in the statute books.
Does the BSTU support corporal punishment?
I cannot say that the BSTU supports corporal punishment or does not support corporal punishment because they've never done a survey to that to determine what the feeling of the general membership is. However, we do have members that do support and we do have members that do not support.
No, I like to defend young people as much as I can. I went to school. When I was going to school, we had fights. Is it fair to say that violence has increased within schools, or is it the era of social media that is making it seem as though things are worse than they were 20 years ago?
No, violence has increased in schools. I don't know if in your time at school you ever witnessed or in any way were made that you would have known of student on teacher violence. And that is something that is far more common than might be reported. There are definitely more fights in schools now. Children, this whole thing about anger and the romanticizing of anger. This is the way to behave. This is what is cool. You're bad, and to be bad is good. And the extent to which now persons are unwilling to talk, they see the fights on social media, not necessarily among students, but among adults. There's a violence in the music that has become far more prevalent. There's the violence in the movies that they watch. It doesn't take one bullet to kill anyone anymore in a movie. They use a whole cartridge in relation to. So it is violence that is exaggerated. And it imprints on the minds of young people. And they think that this is the way to resolve a conflict. Before, children would bring matters to teachers where they felt aggrieved by the actions of another student, and they would allow the teacher or the guidance counselor or the principal to resolve it. That is not the case. Now we have children also that are members of gangs, that are being recruited by gang members. And because of that indoctrination and that mental mindset, they believe that violence is the way to go. So, as students, you and I get into an argument during the day, and by the end of school, my gang members are outside waiting to beat you up along with me. That didn't happen before. Before, too, when fights occurred, especially among boys, boys would fight at lunchtime, and by 3 o'clock, they're
Yeah,
walking out of the
yeah.
school together. That does not happen. There's this whole retribution thing. So it must continue. You fought with me today, I have to bring a weapon for you, a weapon to school for you tomorrow. That did not exist before, or to the extent that it does presently.
And again, when I was going to school not too long ago, teachers were respected to the degree that they were also feared. Do you think that that is where the breakdown has occurred, that children no longer respect authority as they used to?
That is it exactly. There's a general lack of respect for law and order in the society. And that is imprinted on the minds of children. We've seen clips with persons responding to police in a way that was unheard of before in Barbados. And through social media, of course, this is circulated. And again, the young believe, the youth, that this is the way to behave. So all of these factors contribute to violence in schools. But I want to say that in addressing the issue of violence, parent accountability, we must look at parent accountability, I do believe, far more seriously and start holding parents responsible for the actions of their children. I think until we start to do that, we will not see the improvement that we need to see, or the cessation that we need to see in relation to this matter.
The Ministry of Education recently introduced a revised national grooming policy, and this gives boys the freedom to wear their hair braided to school, and girls can now wear extensions. What is the union's take on this new national grooming policy?
Let me say that teachers have complained. Many of them do not like it. Insofar as, and it doesn't apply to boys only, it's also girls.
Girls as well, yeah.
But teachers are complaining that students are now looking untidy and unkempt, which is in contradiction to what the name grooming policy connotates. And there are complaints that the boys especially are not combing their hair, that there is general untidiness, and people are not, they're looking less groomed. And the extent to which this in turn might contribute to greater indiscipline is of concern to teachers.
So the relaxed measures are being abused?
Yes, they are.
But this goes back to what you said earlier about parent accountability.
Exactly. And the thing is that when teachers then try to enforce, they come up against criticism from parents, letters from lawyers, trips to the ministry by the parents to complain about the teachers. There is all of that. So it is making a generally increasingly difficult teaching, learning environment, even more so.
So teachers then feel as though they don't have any power.
Exactly.
And therefore no control.
Exactly. And that is not a situation that we should be in at any point in time in our educational system.
Well, Ms. Redman, still a lot more to discuss. Stay with us. You're watching One on One.
When does a mental health issue become a problem? When should you reach out for help? I'm Krisnan Hurdle, clinical psychologist and certified life coach. Mental health issues interrupt a person's daily functions. An issue becomes a disorder when a person isn't able to carry out their everyday activities like household duties, personal upkeep and hygiene, or interferes with their ability to function socially, to interact with others inside the household, or interferes with their ability to function on the job or carry out other activities. If a person finds themselves needing to self-isolate, losing touch with reality, or having an impaired ability to think, reason, or function, and if this occurs over a period of days, weeks, or months, then it is time that they reach out for help.
Keep it clean, keep it green. Barbadians, we invite you to get involved and play your part as we clean and green Barbados. Come into your community with media launches, bulk waste collection exercises, community engagement sessions, and giveaways. Get on board. Let's keep Barbados clean and green. Beautiful, beautiful Barbados.
Welcome back as we continue our conversation with the president of the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Ms. Mary Ann Redman. Now, Ms. Redman, in the first half, we dealt with issues like violence and discipline. We dealt with the new national grooming policy, but the Ministry of Education also recently introduced a nutritional policy as well. That seems to be creating some level of confusion amongst teachers.
Yes, and I don't understand why, really, because, well, the confusion I am assuming you're referring to relates to what I've seen in print media, where the assumption was made that teachers were going to be asked to
Supervise.
the duty of supervision. And in our meetings with the ministry, that was never ever indicated to us. The ministry never asked the teachers to provide a supervisory function in that regard, and they could not, insofar as it would constitute a change in our terms and conditions of service, and it is something that would have had to have been negotiated with the unions. So we were never asked to provide any supervisory function. What was stated was that teachers could do as is normal, as a normal part of their nurturing and in loco parentis role, use moral suasion where they see a particular child perhaps eating unhealthily, but no formal or informal request was made of teachers to provide a supervisory role in relation to the implementation of this policy. We do believe, however, that the push towards wellness has to go beyond a nutrition program, and we have to look at how we organize other things in schools. For example, in many schools, in secondary schools, unless you're doing PE as an examination subject, fifth formers don't do PE as part of their curriculum. And that is something that perhaps should be modified. And physical education should again form part of your weekly program in your school setting for upper school, fifth formers and sixth formers as well. And there is a whole issue of the vendors who sell outside the school premises. Some schools let them come onto the premises. The thing is that if you're going to be serious about that, perhaps there needs to be a licensing of those persons so that there is, again, an accompanying provision so that licensed vendors in schools can have maybe perhaps discounts on healthy snacks, fruits, etc. for students so that it encourages the application of the policy across the board.
In terms of how the policy is working since its implementation, what has the feedback been like?
I have not had any negative feedback thus far. Nothing negative.
Now, let's deal with a topic that you like to talk about, money. Compensation for the BSTU remains a concern. You still have the issue of delayed payment for temporary teachers. That has been something that has been going on since, again, I was at school. It's nothing new.
It, in some schools, has gotten worse. Insofar as we have some teachers working for months as temporary teachers who have just come into the system who are not being paid. We have too sometimes a situation where a temporary teacher has completed a year and with the following, at the commencement of the following year, they're not paid for September or October because they've fallen off the payment schedule. Those things should not be happening. We have in some instances, teachers not being paid for the diploma in education. There's one case that comes immediately to mind where that person did the diploma in education 2 years ago. And that gives you an immediate increase in salary of 2 increments. And there should be no problem in allowing the person to access that increase in salary. Yet that is a problem. We are having a problem with persons who are acting in positions of special responsibility. That will be your year heads, your heads of department. They work for you. Some of them have been working for years, performing those roles, those functions, and not being paid. And as we attempt to address these issues, too often, far too often, the problem is resting at the level of the school, as reported to us by the ministry and as reported to us by the Ministry of the Public Service, where some secretary treasurers don't seem to be processing in a timely manner the information that they need to for that to be passed on. The other thing that we are told is that information when passed on is often not complete and therefore has to be returned to the school. So it is a level of inefficiency that is operating in some schools because these problems occur far more frequently at some schools in the system than at others. So yes, that remains a problem. We have people acting as deputy principals who are not being paid on time. We paid a year and a half, 2 years after they've taken up that position. Those things should not be happening. And we are of the firm belief in the BSTU that when you work, you must be paid. Hence, I may come across as being always involved in many items for our membership. But that is a basic industrial relations tenet. Fair day's pay for fair day's work. Of course, we can argue that teachers aren't being paid fairly because they deserve much more. Mm-hmm. So the little that we get, we must get.
I don't think anyone will argue that. I don't think anyone will argue that. Still on the topic of money, mm-hmm. the BSTU is still at an impasse with the Caribbean Examinations Council.
Yes.
With regards to compensation for
yes.
marking school-based assessment.
Yes. And actually, I was very pleased to hear just about 2 months ago that the government of Grenada is now paying their teachers for the supervision and marking of SBAs. So in the region, it is now Jamaica and Grenada. Mind you, I am not in favor of government having to pay the teachers, because the SBA is CXC's examination paper 3. And therefore, the responsibility falls on CXC to pay teachers just as they pay the markers for papers 1 and 2. We have always argued that this SBA is a paper that without which no student can pass any exam that has an SBA component. So the work that is required of the teacher to assist the student in completing that process, that SBA process, should be compensated. It is part and parcel of CXC's exam, and teachers need to be paid to complete all of the work that CXC requires of them in that regard. There are many members of the BSTU who do not mark the SBAs. They will help the children, they will supervise, they will do everything. They do in fact mark the first draft and the second draft and the third draft and a fourth draft if necessary. Persons don't understand the amount of work that is required in assisting children to complete those SBAs. The children just don't write the SBA and hand it in. Teachers mark a number of drafts before they're satisfied with the end product to send to CXC. All of that must be taken into consideration, and therefore, hence our demand, which is reasonable.
Of course it is. Across the teaching service, you also have the issue of supersession.
Yes. And it has, with the introduction of the Public Service Act, become of greater concern insofar as the Act requires that vacant positions be advertised. Whereas before, once you had the seniority and a position became vacant, you were promoted to that position. Now, that is no longer the case. And so once the ad goes out, anybody who meet the criteria, the qualifications, etc., can apply. And therefore, many persons sometimes who have worked for many years are not seen to have done the quote-unquote best interview. And they lose out in that regard. But what is even more worrisome is that sometimes if a vacancy occurs, to immediately fill it, they will in fact let the most senior person act. For example, in a position of special responsibility, year head or head of department, year head / senior teacher or head of department. And so we can have someone acting in that position, the most senior person acting in that position for 3, 4, 5 years. And then they decide to advertise so that the assignment can be filled permanently. And it having been advertised, of course, anybody can apply. And too often what happens is that the persons who have acted already and who have done a good job are overlooked, and somebody who has never demonstrated any capacity in that regard because they haven't had the opportunity to act is chosen over the person who had been acting. And we have quite a number of cases like that, and it causes great frustration in the teaching service because there are so limited promotional opportunities, so very limited promotional opportunities. And it is very demotivating and frustrating for persons that happens to.
Based on those points, are you seeing a situation where teaching is no longer seen as that profession that one should aspire to enter into?
I don't know if I can say that, but what I can say is that we have to find ways of rewarding, recognizing and rewarding teachers for the work that they do. Whether that reward is entirely in promotional opportunities or otherwise, we have to find ways to make teachers feel better about the efforts, the sacrifices that they make on a daily basis. One of the things that we were able to secure in our last salary negotiations, the BSTU with government, and we were so happy about this because this is something that certainly since I have been president since 2005, we have been asking for as a union, and that is the introduction of the master teacher. And that will happen. There are going to be 22 master teachers across the system, 12 in the primary section and 10 in the secondary. And that is just, as we pointed out to government, that is the tip of the iceberg insofar as you really will need more, many more at the level, especially of the secondary school where there are so many different subjects offered. And so that position of master teacher will be an avenue where teachers who like the classroom, they like the teaching, the interaction, classroom interaction, can remain within that environment and still have an opportunity for promotion. They don't have to go into administration then for promotional opportunities. So we are very, very happy that we were finally able to achieve that for the teaching fraternity.
Which leads us to the next point of the long-touted Teaching Service Commission, which is yet to be established. We've been hearing about it for a long time, but that commission will govern all of those concerns, the hiring, promotion, and the discipline of
appointments
teachers.
and discipline, yes. And provision was made for it in 1974 in the Constitution, yes. But it was never proclaimed. It never came into being. And we have been given the assurance, not my praying hands, that will soon happen. And we are really looking forward to that Teaching Service Commission. There are so many teachers in the system. There are so many teacher issues that need the discreet attention that get lost in the wider Ministry of the Public Service and the Public Service Commission. And we do feel that with the Teaching Service Commission, it will do a lot for teacher morale and teacher professionalism. So we really, really are looking forward to that.
Despite many teachers feeling demotivated, we know that it is a massive sacrifice.
Oh, yes.
It is not the easiest job in the world.
On a daily basis.
And as I
yes.
tell people, a teacher can make or break a student.
Yes.
So the impact is critical. And we know that a lot of times schools lack resources and teachers actually use their own. Yes.
Consistently. As a matter of fact, another thing we were trying to get in our BSTU negotiations with government was we framed it, an educational resource allowance on a yearly basis for teachers. We were not able to secure it as yet, but we are optimistic. Our non-salary items are still being negotiated, and we are really hoping that that will materialize, because what you're saying is entirely true. Teachers clothe, they feed, and they provide educational resources for many students on a daily basis.
And we know they go outside of their job description.
Always. Teachers transport children to and from school. They pay bus fares for them. Some teachers, I know, with some students who have special talents, skills, assist with extra lessons in that regard, music and singing and playing musical instruments and so on. To say nothing of acting as parents.
Yes.
There are so many teachers who act as parents for students, who act as counselors, for parents. The job description goes way, way, way beyond what is outlined in the Education Act.
And some teachers have gone as far as to adopt
Children, of
Yeah.
course, yes. One comes to mind immediately. She became a principal of a primary school.
Let's look at the issue of education reform. We've been hearing about education reform for quite some time, but it looks as though now it is going to become a reality.
Yes, at long last. And this is something that we see as a mission critical issue. And this is something that, again, in the BSTU, certainly for the last 15 years, we have been advocating at the level of the Ministry of Education because we recognize the deficits and the challenges that exist in our present system. And we figured that there needs to be a profound, a total transformation of the system. For years, we have been touting the notion of no child left behind. But reform will allow us to really operationalize that in a practical way. Of course, I'm not at liberty to speak of the mechanics, but I can speak of the general philosophy and what the ministry has in mind to achieve, the objectives and the aims of reform. And that is to cater in the best way that we can as a nation to the real needs of our children. As I said before, to meet them where they are, to provide the specific types of instruction that they need in recognition, as I said before, of different intelligences that people have, the different talents, the different skills, so that we produce a productive, adaptable citizen. Student in the first instance, citizen in the second. And someone who can meet the needs of Barbados in the 21st century. And what they have planned in a meaningful way will help students to really be their best, to self-actualize. There is a new planned transition from primary to secondary. I think that is, I can say that because that is public knowledge. And the secondary system will be broken down into 2 levels, junior academy and academies of excellence. And that changed structure will allow students to have the type of exposure that they need to make the choices that they need further on best suited to their capabilities, to their intelligences, and to equip them for life after school. It provides also, I think, the opportunity, it will provide an opportunity to address things like class size, the student-teacher ratio. It will address what I call best fit in terms of teachers teaching at the levels, the potential of teachers to teach at the levels at which they're most comfortable. And it will also address timetable. It can potentially address timetabling flexibility. Insofar, I have always believed, and we and the BSTU have always said that sixth form schools, at the sixth form level, the schools should be structured differently to allow for the length of class time that you need. A 40-minute session in the sixth form, by the time you move from one class to another and students settle on whatever, really is not the best. And so it allows for restructuring of that level of education so that you can get the best possible out of the system. The student can derive the very best possible teaching, learning experience that can be provided for them, given our resources and given what we have available to us in terms of plants, etc.
You mentioned student to teacher ratio. What is the best possible student to teacher ratio?
Sometimes that changes with subject, from subject to subject, insofar as I don't know if that we can say that there is a best, because, for example, in a lab where you're dealing with chemicals or you're dealing with a stove, depending on if you're the home ec lab and so on.
You would need more supervision.
Yeah, exactly. More supervision for safety and health reasons, and for the one-on-one type of interaction that that situation requires. In a classroom setting, you may be able to have a greater number too, depending on the issues that the students may have. You may have children who, in the classroom, they need more one-on-one assistance. In those settings, you need smaller numbers. If you have a group of students who are extremely talented, gifted, you may be able to have larger numbers because they need less of that type of personal supervision and assistance. And so it may vary, but certainly I think that a class should not be more than 20.
Because I was going to say that certain schools that have massive roles,
oh yes,
you have 1 to 30.
34, 35, yes, in many of our schools. And that is really difficult because initially too, the plant sizes were not built to accommodate those size classes. And so the children are essentially squeezed into the classroom. And you have children in the classroom close to one another. They're tempted to be disruptive, to talk, to play the fool rather than to pay attention. And so our schools were not, many of them, built to accommodate the large class sizes that we now experience in many of them. And the ministry does recognize that there's a need to build more secondary schools, and that is also a plan.
Regarding education reform, how will it tackle indiscipline?
Well, as I said, if we have the division of age groups, there is less potential for the older students to influence in a negative way the younger. The reverse is also true, that you can have a positive influence by having older children there, but in some instances we are seeing that this is having a negative effect. Class size can also address that. The fact too that children are now exposed to a wider subject area, so they're able to do things that they really want to do, things that they like, things that they're interested in. And so their focus then will be on doing well, achieving success in those areas of interest to them.
Ms. Redman, we dealt with matters pertaining to the BSTU. We looked at indiscipline in schools, education reform. Let's talk about Marianne Redman. Back in 2017, for some reason it was controversial. You had applied for your retirement.
Yes.
And then you decided you didn't want to retire anymore. What happened then?
Better judgment came into play, and I exercised my right, because when one applies in the public service, when one applies for retirement, and you apply for your retirement, you can be granted or you can be denied, or you have the right to withdraw. Those three options are there. I chose to withdraw my initial application for personal reasons. There was some misunderstanding in the minds of some aspects of the press, where they conflated my retirement from the teaching service with a retirement from the position as president of the union. But that was a total misunderstanding on the part of those persons involved, insofar as our Constitution allows retired members to continue as officers, and we saw that in the person of the Most Honorable Patrick Frost. We saw that with Margaret Cummings Williams. We saw that with Phil Perry. We saw that with Mildeen Messiah. A whole host of persons who continued in their positions as officers of the BSTU, having retired. And I think that is where the confusion arose, because persons misunderstood or simply were ignorant of the facts as they related to the two things with me.
So this had nothing to do with Marianne Redman wanting to stay on a little longer and create more strife?
Not at all. I am not. Strife and me, those, no.
Okay.
No.
But you are retiring at the end of this year.
Yes, I am. Some people might be saying finally, but yes, my classroom sojourn ends in July, and I go on leave in September, and I retire in December.
Looking back after 43 years, is there anything different that you would have done, not only as an educator, but as a trade unionist?
As a trade unionist, perhaps I might have decided to run for office earlier, as I had been encouraged to do, and I delayed that for many years. As a teacher, it has been an edifying, exciting, frustrating. The adjectives are many, but I have enjoyed every day of my teaching experience. It has really caused me to grow as a person. And my association with the union, and this is what I tell members all the time, when you're acquainted with your rights and responsibilities, because we stress the responsibilities, as a union member, it empowers you. It gives you a sense of confidence. It gives you a sense of professionalism. You know what you can and you cannot do, and therefore you act in that knowledge. And it really does help you to develop and grow as a professional.
Well, ma'am, if I do not see you before you go on your long leave and then retirement, we wish you a very long and happy,
thank you,
well-deserved retirement.
Thank you.
And thank you for your many, many, many years of service to the teaching profession.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. And thank you for chatting with us this evening.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. That was the president of the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Miss Marianne Redman. I am Lisa Lord. You are watching One on One. Do have yourself a wonderful evening.